So can you please tell me a little bit about yourself, your name, where you live and work?
Okay. My name is Kathryn Britton, and I live in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and I work in my home. So I'll start out by saying that I worked for 30 years as a software engineer, and 26 of those years I worked for IBM. So for me, one of the big changes in life was to go from being one of 350,000 people to being one of one. So that's been a big adjustment in my life, to go from being part of a huge organization to being just by myself. And as a matter of fact, one of the things that I really miss about working in a large organization is working in close partnership with other people.
Yeah.
So I've found that a lot of the projects that I've gotten started on have involved creating partnerships with other people, because I just don't like working alone that much.
Mm.
I mean, there's some things I like. I like to go into my office, for example, and start writing something or thinking through something. I really can get really lost in it, but it's when you come up for air and you realize you want to have somebody to share it with, then it becomes important to have other people that you're working with.
Yeah. What do you do?
I do a bunch of things. I do some coaching, not a tremendous amount of coaching. I also teach a course called Managing Project Teams at the University of Maryland in the graduate program of project management, and that is an application of positive psychology. In particular, we've got all of these engineers who are becoming project managers, and engineers many times are technically strong and not so people strong.
Right, yeah.
So part of what we're doing is helping them learn the people skills, and we're doing it with the backdrop of, let's create positive workplaces. What would that mean? How might it affect your own success as a project manager? And it's really funny, because you'll start out, and it's a required course. You'll start out and people will think, oh, I've got to take this mushy woo-woo stuff, it's a requirement. And usually by about the third session, people have really see that this is an important course for them. Some of them find it a transformative course. So that makes it a whole lot of fun to kind of get some of these ideas across to engineers. So I do some coaching. I teach at the University of Maryland. I've been working on a book with Marie-Josée Char on ways to help people build health habits. So it's a book that's a coaching manual, a self-coaching manual. So it's a way for people to work towards their own goals, and to take, it's a workbook, so they write in it, and they basically find their own path through about 50 different avenues to better health. Yeah. They pick and try various ones. I'm also an associate editor for Positiv Psykologi News Daily, so I take articles that people have written about putting positive psychology into practice, and I edit them and make them ready for display and basically manage the website.
Yeah.
So I probably have other things that I'm doing. There have been times in my since I became a positive psychologist where I've been a bit of an opportunity addict. But those are the ones that are sort of top of mind right now.
Right. And what's your background for doing all of this?
Well, I have, my 30 years of experience as a software engineer, which included being a team leader and mentoring. I've mentored probably 40, 50 people over the course of my career there. Then I went to the Masters of Applied Positive Psychology program at Penn. I continued after that working for about 9 months at IBM, where I was putting these ideas into practice, and actually was able to write a paper for a coaching journal about my experiences working with teams, which involved a lot of appreciative interviews, and a lot of getting people to work together, do some brainstorming about how to put the ideas into practice. I also have basic coach training from Coach Training Associates, or it's CTA, I can't remember what it stands for. And then I got some additional training through, I got the 60 hours, because I do have an ACC credential, the Associate Certified Coach, I think is how that spells out. And then experience, working with people.
Right. And how long would you say that you've been working, applying positive psychology?
Well, I graduated in 2006.
Yeah.
from the University of Pennsylvania. And I've been finding various ways of putting positive psychology into practice since then. And there's a lot of trial and error. There's a lot of, seeing what works. I've done a lot of speaking to groups, large and small, about what positive psychology means and how it can actually be put into practice. I'm really very much a fan of Tal Ben-Shahar's idea that it's important for us to create a bridge from the ivory tower to Main Street, and that is, I guess, in a sense, my mission. And so my mission is to make the ideas, to make what we learn through research, to make it accessible and applicable for people who are just living ordinary lives.
Yeah. And when you work with people, do you choose the subjects, the issues that you're going to present on, or do they, like in coaching, people often come and ask for something, they present the issues?
Well, it depends on the context. When I'm I've actually found this to be somewhat difficult, trying to put together the coach training I got with the positive psychology training I got, because there was a strong theme throughout all of the coach training that I've gotten, and through the ICF, the International Coach Federation, ethics, etc., that the client owns the agenda in a coaching relationship. So it's not like teaching. It's not like you go in and say, today we're going to work on this. Today, they own the agenda. It's their time. They're the ones who determine what it is that they want to work on. I do sometimes suggest things, like I always try and do a wheel of life as an introductory exercise and get them to go through and talk about these different, the eight, this, I think it's in the trying to think, it's is it Whitworth or Wentworth book on coaching. There's a picture of a wheel of life with 8 different wedges. And I get people to go through and talk about how satisfied they are and why they're satisfied and why they're dissatisfied for each one of the wedges, as a way for me to get to know the whole person.
Yeah.
And part of this came from an experience I had. We did a lot of sample sessions when I was going through the coach training, of getting friends and people that you meet in the grocery store or whatever to do a complimentary session so you can practice the ideas. And I had the experience with a very close friend that she came in and she said, I'm really having a lot of trouble at work, and I'm having a lot of trouble, I'm very concerned about money right now, and these are what I have on my mind. And I said, well, can we do just a quick, going around the wheel? And we got to personal growth, and she started telling me that, I just remembered that in the past, when I've taken time in my day to go and spend 10 or 15 minutes meditating, that actually my concerns in these other areas sort of take care of themselves. And so I'm focusing on my problem area, where actually, if I remembered to focus on an area that gives me strength, that some of the difficulty with the problem areas would go away.
Yeah.
And so that is one of the reasons I like. Particular reasons is it kind of, instead of just going in and saying, okay, I want to work on X, total focus on X, to do a few things occasionally, to get the picture bigger, to take a broader view of themselves, the whole self, and not just the part that's really focused on the problem at hand.
Mm-hmm. And so when you coached her, what would that look like? Well,
then we started talking about, well, what could you do to make it possible in your life to remember to focus on the mind, to bring the mindfulness back in your life? What are the things that you could do that would help you remember it, that would remove the obstacles, that would bring this back in? She came up with the idea of mindfulness as being important, the mindfulness meditation being important to her. Then we looked at, well, why don't you do it? And, are there things that you can do that will bring this back into your life? But actually the important thing in that session was not any of the, well, what can you do, how do you remove the obstacles? It was just the, aha, I forgot.
Yeah.
This is important to me. This works for me.
Yeah.
And it brought it back to the top of her mind.
Right. And did you have her for several sessions, or?
No, in this particular case, I just had her for the one session.
Right. And have you had others for several sessions?
Oh yeah. I mean, I've had, you know, I've had a number of clients that I've had one for 4 years, and I've had other clients for periods of, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, and people are very different about what they want to work on. Well, the two things that I seem to end up working on the most with people are, I think I might want to make a change in my life, but I'm not sure. Okay, so I want to explore the possibility of a transition. And sometimes people will decide, okay, I do want to make a transition, and then the coaching goes into, okay, what steps do I go through to make it successfully?
Yeah.
And I've had a few cases where people say, no, actually, I could make myself a happier person right where I am. So it's more, how do I get the most out of where I am? I had one fellow, for example, who said, people keep asking me, when are you going to retire? When are you going to retire? And I don't know how to answer them. And so after we'd been working together for a while, I said, I've got an answer now. I'm going to tell people that I'll retire when I stop having fun at work, and I'm still having fun at work, so I don't know when that will be.
Yeah.
So he then, we talked through what are the things that could make it so that he continued, because the work environment for all of us changed over the last 20, 30 years. It's a different work environment than it was. And not everybody can have fun in this environment the way it is, but he was. Yeah. So that recognition of, I don't have to change, I don't have to retire just because people keep asking me, was for him, an aha.
Yeah, yeah.
So.
And so, what did his sessions look like? If before the first session, in between the first and second, what did that look like?
I'm not really sure I can answer that. This particular client was several years ago.
Right. So what does it typically look like? And I'm not sure I can answer. That's one that I'm not really too sure I have it typically for, because I don't have a mental progression of, now we're going to do this, now we're going to do this, now we're going to do this. So a lot of it's like, I do, for example, try to at the beginning of sessions to get people to think about the things that are going on in their lives that they can celebrate, because I find that a lot of times people, it's like they're so quick to think about what's going wrong, and that they forget to take the time to celebrate. Yeah. And with some people, I'll actually explain ideas like, active constructive responding, particularly if people are getting to, I had one client not too long ago who, people in her family had lost jobs, and they'd finally, after a long period of time, they'd gotten jobs, and she was really happy about it. And so we talked a bit about, how could she help them get the most out of the experience of now finally having successfully gotten a job. So, and this was not totally successful for me to explain the idea of active constructive responding. I personally think it's like, wow, it's an idea that, it's one of about 5 ideas that I wish I'd learned before I had children. Right. So, but I don't find that people necessarily want to be educated on the theory behind these things. Some people do, but not very many do. But so I guess what I'm trying to say is, occasionally I will try to explain an idea just because I think it makes things stick. Yeah. But a lot of times it's a modeling thing, so, to say, people come in with something good that's happened, to get them to actually take some time to talk through it, to relive it, to experience the details. And then maybe sometimes afterwards you could say, how did that feel? And, well, it felt really good. And I said, this asking these questions and responding, to getting people to relive their experiences is an easy thing that you can do with the people that you love to help them get the most out of their
positive experiences. So you can kind of like maybe help them expand it out into a broader sphere. But I don't, some people are, I'm sure probably have, well, they do this kind of testing and then we do this steps and whatever. And I haven't tended to do that in my coaching practice. And part of it is and I'll be really humble here. I'm not sure I'm a great coach. Okay, so I don't go into all of this with I have a lot of humility about myself as a coach. People seem to be happy with working with me, but of course I don't know whether they'd be happy if they worked with somebody else. But I don't have a clear process in my mind of, we're gonna work through in this particular way. A lot of it is just being open to the moment and figuring that a lot of the value in good coaching is having somebody who's really listening to you. Yeah. So I listen and I remember, and I can say, oh, that's like, when you faced this problem before, and or remember when you did something and it really worked before, or whatever. So a lot of it is listening, remembering, kind of mirroring back to people the things that they say, but it's not something where I feel like I've got a curriculum or I've got any kind of particular way of working through it. And I don't always, I have at least a few clients where I sometimes wonder, are we making progress? Because a lot of times we'll talk and, nothing in terms of commitment to action or whatever will come out of it. I have one client in particular I'm thinking about who just almost never really signs up really to never commits to doing anything. But what he finally told me after a long time was that he thought he was a whole lot better off than people in his organization because he had a chance to process what was going on in a very, very dynamic, very stressful, very confusing context with somebody who had no skin in the game, who could just, listen, remember things that had happened before. He had a metaphor that it was like going up into, you're either down on the dance floor dancing, or else you go up into the balcony and you look down and you can see everybody dancing. Yeah. And then when he would come and talk to me, it was like going up in the balcony and looking down on the dance floor and getting to see everything together, and it would make the patterns make sense to him. Right. And he felt that he was a lot more resilient in his work environment because he did this than the people around him. Yeah. But it wasn't like we're furthering action, because it was more a matter of just being able to, well, it certainly wasn't like furthering any kind of straight path action. It was like enabling somebody to run a maze, right? Where you don't know whether you're going forward or whatever, you're just finding your way through it. As I mentioned before, I did a lot of mentoring in my career experience, and I really make a point that what I'm doing now is not mentoring. Okay, I'm not, when I was a mentor at IBM, I was always at a higher level than the people I mentored, and so I had a lot more experience. I knew the organization, I knew people, I knew sort of how to deal with things in organizations, and so I could give advice to people, like, well, why don't you try this, or you could talk to this person, or here's some things that you might want to try. It's always voluntary, but you still give advice like, well, I'm more experienced than you are, and so one of the things in the coaching experience is to be very aware that you're not the expert on this client's life. You're not the expert on any of the things that they're doing. You are a good listener, but you're not giving advice. I do sometimes. I'll say, can I blurt? This is an expression I learned from Margaret Greenberg. Can I blurt? I think might be part of the CTI training, as a way, and people kind of get learn after a while that what this means is, can I share something from my experience, or can I just say what popped into my mind for what it's worth to see but it's not like I'm thinking through, this is how you solve your problems. It's more you reminded me of this, or I had this experience that affected me in this way. How does that relate to what you're experiencing?
Yeah.
But it's one of the things I really find difficult is the whole question of, you learn in positive psychology, you learn about positive interventions, you learn about positive exercises, you learn about all these things that people can do. And yet in the coaching training that I got, it was, you're not teaching people things, you're not putting people through a course. In fact, I believe in the ICF ethics, it's very specific that if you're going to use a tool, the tool has to be very, very specifically right for that person in that context, to be very sparing with using tools. So I sometimes feel like the two are a little hard to put together.
Right, yeah. And
I don't think I'm a natural coach. I thought I was a pretty good mentor back in my days, but I don't know that I'm a natural coach.
No.
It's one of the for some reason this just popped into mind. A very close friend of mine died earlier this month, and she was 87 years old, and she'd written a letter to my daughter, and who was in her 20s, and one of the things she said was, a dead end is not necessarily a disaster. And so sometimes I think that coaching might be sort of a dead end for me, but I also want to be sure that with whatever I'm doing, that I'm staying connected with people who have real strengths and real situations and real challenges and real, so that I don't get off into Never Never Land where I'm writing about abstract people.
Right.
So I don't know that that's why I was so kind of hesitant when you asked me. It was like, well, I don't know if you really mean, I don't know if I'm really one of the people you want to talk to here. Because, I'm sure that there are people who do a tremendous amount more coaching and are tremendously more expert at it. But in my mind, it's really important for people who are doing anything in this field, who are applied, not to get separated from reality.
Yeah. You mentioned the Wheel of Life. Do you use other assessments also sometimes?
Yes. In fact, recently, one of the things I suggested to somebody was to use the Realize 2 strengths exercise. In particular for this person, the whole concept of learned behavior, realized strengths, unrealized strengths, and weaknesses, the quadrant that they use there, seemed like it would be really, really useful to be thinking about opportunities that this person was considering. A way of kind of looking at what might be the best pathway through this. So
how did you present that to the person?
With this particular person, I actually explained that idea, the concept, and said, you might find this fun to do. And she just went off into the web, but we haven't, this is actually somebody I've just started working with, so we haven't debriefed it yet.
Right.
So, and I don't have formal training in using the Realize 2, and I understand that they do have a training program for people.
Yeah.
Right.
You can take it on the internet, and you can also...
Right. Yeah, I'm thinking about that. I actually had somebody... Another thing that I do is that I've run 2 or 3 different study groups of people who are just interested in the concept of putting positive psychology to work. I have one in my community that had a techie who was developing web applications, a teacher in a local community college, a doctor in the local student health, I'm trying to think of a psychotherapist, and several other people, kind of a wide range. And we'd get together, about once a month and just talk our way through ideas in positive psychology that would be useful in these different contexts. And so I met with one of them the other day for lunch because she just finished her PhD, and she's gotten a job working with people, with adults with learning disabilities, who what kinds of tools could they put together to help them get past this barrier of feeling like they'd had nothing but failures in education in the past. How could they help people, get to the point where they could learn to do the things they knew, particularly people who'd lost jobs and are looking for new ones and are rather discouraged about it. And so I had when she was working on her dissertation, I'd suggested that she look at the Realize 2 she was looking at StrengthsFinder, and I said, well, you might also look at Realize 2 because of this quadrant model. And she was telling me that she thought it was a brilliant approach to work with people with learning disabilities because they've been very focused on their weakness quadrant. And if you can help them work on their own personal stories that move them up into the realized and the unrealized strengths departments, that you can help them change their overall stories about themselves, which can help them change their outcomes. Yeah. So a lot of what I do is, I'm thinking about other ways that I contribute to, the application of positive psychology. A lot of what I do is pass on ideas to people. Right. In that particular way. Yeah.
And when you debrief, you mentioned debriefing an assessment before. How do you do that?
Well, I don't do a lot with it. I don't do a lot with assessments, so I'm not sure I can really. It's mostly. I guess the one thing I would say about it is that I try to make sure that people understand that assessments are not. Somebody has the blueprint to you, and now I'm going to interpret that blueprint to you, that the person is himself or herself the expert on themselves, and so the only thing an assessment can give them is a hypothesis that they then need to think about and validate, does this really fit for me or not? So I learned that from Myers-Briggs training, which is one of the things I really like about Myers-Briggs, is this idea that there's no assessment that is really going to give you a picture of yourself. The best it can do is give you some ideas that might stretch the way you think about yourself. Yeah. The other, for some reason, one of the things that pops into my mind is I was working through, I had somebody a number of years ago do the VIA, and one of her top strengths was humility. And she, as I think people often do, found that to be very disappointing. So part of what we did was to explore, well, how might this show up in your life? And she came up with a story, and she learned how to think of it as, well, I don't have to be the center of the stage. I would actually rather, in my professional life, and this turned out, was very much the case, I would rather be somebody who makes things happen where other people have the spotlight on them, and I have all kinds of things that I'm contributing, but I'm not the one with the spotlight on me. That was for her so it's kind of helping her tell her own story about it. Yeah. So I guess that's my principle with using any kind of assessment, is just to make sure that people, take what works and throw away the rest. Yeah.
What about interventions? Do you use positive interventions, or are there interventions?
It depends on the context. I don't have like a set of interventions that I use with individual clients. Sometimes I'll suggest, or I'll ask a question, do you like to journal? Do you like to write things down? And if they do, then we might explore, things that might be helpful to them there. But I can't say I do a lot of that. I'm familiar with a number of positive interventions, but I just find them a little hard to work into coaching without feeling like I'm trying to grab the wheel. Right. Or what's that expression, hijack the agenda? Yeah. When I'm teaching, one of the things that we do, the course is called Managing Project Teams. So one of the things that we try to do is, we have a major team project, is we have people do a lot of assessments in that course, a lot of assessments, probably too many. And we go through and talk about, well, what might the assessments mean? And we've just been working on a workbook to help them kind of collect all the information from the assessments, and then have some contemplative questions about, well, what does this mean to me? How might I put this into effect? and then to think about how that might map into what they need personally from their own workplace. We're also working on ways to use that information to help them build teams and learn about each other and work effectively together. But the idea is that they're putting this team idea into practice in a project.
Right. And you mentioned knowledge sharing, like you tell people, you give ideas. Can you say something more about that?
Well, one of the things that I do is I've gotten so I almost never like explain an idea in sessions, because it's kind of like it's like turning yourself into a teacher. And I always think of the time as being a valuable resource for people, so I want them to be able to use it, the way they want to be able to use it. But sometimes I tend to write really short session notes and send them to clients. Sometimes I think this is a mistake because it takes a lot of time and I'm not really sure. But some of my clients really, really like it. And I'll often say, well, you might find this interesting to read. Or for some reason this just popped into my head. There'll be a metaphor. I like metaphors, and a lot of my clients do too. And one of the metaphors that really worked for one of my clients was Todd Kashdan's idea of an explorer knob. That you've got that anxiety and curiosity are on two ends of one spectrum, and if you're feeling very anxious about a lot of things, if you think about applying curiosity as like sliding the knob towards it, or if you're feeling very anxious, to slide the knob in the other direction. Sometimes I will say, you might really like this, and I point people sometimes to Positive Psychology News Daily articles, and and I'm always willing to explain things that people want to ask, but I try not to get into the teaching mode in coaching. Right. When I'm teaching classes, I am in the teaching mode, but it's very interactive. So there's a lot of dialogue with the people in the class. Sometimes, I have with the ACR, for example, had a classroom of people practice pairwise capitalizing an ACR. And it's usually a very, very effective way of making things click for them. That you get one person capitalizes for a couple of minutes, and while the other one does ACR, and then they swap. And usually, not 100% of the time, but usually the energy in the classroom will go way, way up.
Yeah.
Okay. And so it's a way when it's an appropriate topic, it's a way to take a flagging classroom and kind of generate, get the energy going again.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Right. And when you work with people, do you sometimes change the assessments or change the models or change the theories or the interventions to kind of adapt them to the client or the context?
Oh yeah. One of the things, for example, is if you can, you hear a lot of stories from clients. So if you can somehow take an idea and map it to their story. I had a client who was getting married again, and his daughter from previous marriage was a little unsure about this, and so she started asking him questions, and like, what's her middle name? What's her favorite dessert? Where does she like to go on vacations? You don't mean you don't know the answers to these questions? Are you sure you're ready to get married? And I said, oh, wow, that reminds me of John Gottman's love maps. Yeah. And he said, what do you mean? And I said, oh, John Gottman has this, in the 7 principles of whatever, effective marriage or whatever the book's called, he's got like this whole set of questions for people to explore with their partners to learn more about them. And your daughter is brilliant. She's asking you love map, whether you've been asking love map questions. Yeah. So, and he said, well, how do I go about this? And I said, well, and I happen to have a copy of the book, so I lent it to him. Because there's like a whole bunch of pages of questions and I said, you could have so much fun with this. You could make it a game, where you took turns asking each other questions and exploring, and then you could let your daughter know that you actually did this. Yeah. And now you know the middle name.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it was part of that was putting it in his context. It wasn't like I said, oh, you're getting married again, you need to pull out the 7 principles of whatever. No. It was like this conflict that he was facing with his daughter, and being able to see in that there was something that might actually be useful to him and might help him in terms of making this new situation work.
Yeah, yeah. And when you work with a person like this, how do you do something to establish credibility as a coach or as a positive psychology practitioner, or?
Well, usually by the time I'm coaching somebody, they know that I have this in my background.
Right.
Okay. I don't spend a lot of time explaining it, but it's always there to be asked about. I don't know. It just seems to be part of the backdrop. I don't know exactly what I do, and maybe it's because people sort of know a little bit about me before they start working with me, or exactly what, I don't know.
Right. And what do you do to establish and maintain a good relationship with the people that you're working with?
I ask a lot of questions.
Yeah.
I show a lot of interest. And I am interested. I just like people. I like people's stories. Yeah. And it's funny, I was just down in the Awe and Elevation Symposium downstairs, and I've been finding, in terms of, if I look at what I like to read, what I enjoy reading for pleasure, I like reading the stories of ordinary people who do extraordinary things.
Yeah.
In other words, they're not, they're just people living ordinary lives, but then you start seeing the extraordinary things that happen in the context of their ordinary lives. And so I'm always looking for the ways that people are extraordinary, and trying to reflect it back to them, trying to help people see how extraordinary they are. And I generally, I could possibly say every coaching experience I've had, I find some sense of extraordinary in the people that I'm working with.
Right. And do you do anything special to keep them engaged in the process of working towards their goals, even though when you're not there?
I don't think this is. I don't think I'm all that. That's not one of my strengths. Is kind of engaged in working towards their goals. I find that when I'm working with people, goals are very fluid. And I don't know whether it's a kind of a weakness of mine in terms of my effectiveness as a coach. I do try to help people think through, well, what might you do, or how might you move yourself forward, and whatever. But a lot of times, I very seldom have a sense of people coming in with a goal, boom, 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 goal done, and leave. I find that they just sort of work through. I don't know. I'm having a little bit of trouble with this. Yeah. I think that I am. I'm not really a very firmly goal-driven person myself. In that, I think that I don't have a sense of I'm trying to move from here to there. I have more of a feeling of I'm living my life, and the kind of goals that I have, I'm not a very good Gary Latham kind of goal setter. Very, very specific. I mean, I've had training in SMART goals and things like that, and I'll help people set them, and I'll help people think through that. But that doesn't seem to be the way things really work with the people that I work with. They seem to be working, and maybe this is just the kind of people that I managed to get hooked up with, that it's more like working out a big puzzle than it is moving towards a goal.
Yeah.
It's like I've got all of these pieces in my mind, and I'm trying to figure out how they all fit together and how it's going to work. And then when they fit together, it's kind of like, that's what I wanted to accomplish in order to be able to move forward.
Right. And does anything happen in between the sessions? Like, do you give people homework assignments, or email them, or they call you, or?
I tend to, like I said, send people short notes.
Yeah.
I have some clients who will, for example, fill out a form to prepare for a session.
Yeah.
So they'll do some thinking about, what did I accomplish that I wanted to accomplish, what did I not accomplish, what are new opportunities, and what do I want to do with this session. But that's voluntary. Some people do it and some people don't. So I figure that, this sort of context, some people, that kind of thinking, going through step-by-step process is helpful, and for some people it's not. So now with my students, I give them homework.
Right.
Okay, in particular, one of the most effective forms of homework that we give them are what we call pearl divings, which are, you've heard a lecture, and we give 2.5-hour lectures. So you've heard a lecture on some topic like motivation or whatever. A pearl is a short essay, maybe 2 to 5 paragraphs, 1 page, whatever, where they put that they have a prompt that causes them to think about that concept in the course of their own lives. So they're taking what they're learning as a theory, or as a big model or concept, and taking it and putting it into the context of their own lives.
Right. And how does that work?
It's very effective.
Right.
It's very effective. I think it makes people engage with what they're learning.
Yeah. And what do clients say to you after? What's the feedback that you get from your coaching clients when they've experienced your way of coaching them with your backdrop of positive psychology?
Well, I have some clients who will, actually one client who will tell me, okay, that question you just asked was worth the whole session.
Right.
So I get I get sort of oral feedback in the course of sessions, when things seem to click, or when there are ahas or whatever. I'm not, some people are very, very careful about doing evaluations, and I haven't been as careful about that so I could never use myself as a source of empirical coaching, whatever. I don't pre-test, post-test, or anything like that. It's really, sometimes people will work with me till they achieve, they get a question answered, they get a goal achieved, they've decided whether or not to change jobs, and maybe have made the change, and then they've done that, they say thanks, whatever. But some people, coaching is sort of more of a continuous, this helps me kind of keep my life, work my way through perspective. I don't know, evaluation is not a strength of mine.
Right. And so how do you find out? Is that that they're moving along if you don't evaluate?
Well, I guess part of what I'm hearing, what you're saying, is that coaching is necessarily about moving people along. And I guess what I find and maybe this is just the most recent coaching engagements that I've had, coaching is also about processing what's going on in your life and being able to
like the balcony,
live well with it, you know, to kind of make the best of what's going on in your life.
Right.
And so I guess I don't always have a sense of, you know, we're here and we're going to move to there, and so how far along the path are we? Quite often it's more a matter of, this is going on in my life, and you know, it's not something, maybe it's something I can change, maybe it's something I can't change. How do I want to work through how I think and feel about it, so I can come to the best place for myself.
Right.
And I guess the evaluation there is the fact that you know, that they tell me that it's helpful.
Yeah.
You know? And in one case, you know, as I mentioned earlier, a client was saying that he felt, comparing himself to other people in his environment, that he was a whole lot better off.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, but I've actually thought about this a lot, because sometimes I don't really feel like that people are working with me are moving along a pathway to a goal. It's more like they're kind of managing or learning. There's a lot of, you know, I think that Margaret Greenberg was telling me that every session should deepen a client's learning or further a client's action. I seem to be more on the deepen a client's learning end of things than on the furthering actions end of things.
Yeah.
I mean, some of my clients do further, you know, take steps, move along the path, but maybe it's just the people I'm talking to right now, it seems to be more on the learning side.
When they're satisfied, what do you think has caused them to become more satisfied after a session? Whether or not they've moved along or feel better about where they are?
I think that they walk out feeling like they see things in a broader, more expansive way, that they've been appreciated, they get reminded of their strengths, that they are reminded of what, you know, that well, and it's just the let me back up for a second. When I was a technology person, software engineer, one of the things that I observed was that a whole lot of ideas came out of the space between people. Okay, so I'd get together, I'd have people come into my office and say, you know, I've got this really big technical problem, I don't know how to solve it, and whatever. And we'd talk, and it wasn't like I came up with the idea and gave it to him. It was like the idea grew up in the space between us. Yeah. Well, I think that happens a lot with coaching, that the ideas grow up in the space between us. So it's not like I gave them ideas, you know, or it's not like, well, if they just stayed home, they might have had the same idea. It's just sort of, we create the space where insight and perception grows up in the space between us.
Right. And what would you say that way of working that you're doing? What would you say makes that? Is it different, like positive psychology application in coaching? Is that different from other types of coaching?
Beats me. I mean, I never heard of coaches before I became a positive psychology person, and then was looking for ways to put it into action. Right. So you'll talk to people who are, you know, were professional coaches before they met positive psychology. They can give you input on that, but I can't. Right. I never had a coach. I never heard of coaching. So, right. I mean, I was really ignorant. Right.
But based on your experience, what would you advise other people who are new to this field? What should they do if they want to learn about how to apply positive psychology, for instance, in coaching?
Well, to have an attitude of appreciation. There's actually a nice book by Sarah Oram and others about appreciative coaching. And it's a book that I sometimes use if I'm, you know, particularly looking for ideas for discovery in the early parts of a coaching engagement. But to have an appreciative mindset as you're listening to people, and it becomes kind of a joke with my clients sometimes of, it's always like, this is what's wrong, and I'll say, well, what's right? And so it becomes kind of like, I know what you're going to say. So I think that the primary way that positive psychology fits into coaching for me is this constant realignment of thinking, so that you're not focusing on what's broken and wrong, but you're aware and appreciating what's strong and well in people. And many times they forget.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's helping people see what's strong and well in the people around them.
Yeah.
I had the experience with one client who was getting ready to make a big change, and her husband was like digging his heels in, and he was doing all kinds of things that were annoying her or whatever. And somehow it came up in the discussion that whenever they did anything like go on a vacation, he would be just a real bear during the process of setting out. And then once they got off on vacation, he'd loosen up and he'd become, very much fun to be around. But he was just awful, during the planning and the setting out. He was just horrible to be around. And so, one of the things that we explored was, well, maybe there's something you could hear. You're about to set out on a big adventure. Then maybe you've got him sort of stuck in that area of the planning and the setting out. And if you can, instead of trying to fight him on it, to appreciate the fact that that's just the way he is when those things happen, and then ride with him, maybe you'll get on the vacation, on the adventure, and things will be different.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's helping people see what's right and well in the people around them.
Right.